Hello and welcome to Astrology with Zeke. This is going to be a continuation of my historical figures series. I've mostly been focusing on people who were born at least 500 years ago. Today, we're going to do something very different. We're going to go over my most favorite author of all time. Y'all know who this guy is. We're going to do J.R.R. Tolkien's chart. So, like I said, he's my absolute favorite author. I fell in love with his work when I was just a kid, probably as many of us did for those who are familiar with The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I don't even need to go over those. Everybody knows what that is. Obviously, he is like the grandfather of modern fantasy, even within the past 20 years. Any fantasy author's work probably would not exist had Tolkien never written uh, The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. When you look into his life, he was a very fascinating character. It's pretty well known that he was a devout Catholic and he had interesting political opinions. You can look into his letters if you want to get into those. So even beyond just his work, he was just a very fascinating character because even despite being a very serious Catholic, he also had a deep, deep love for his own ancestral heritage, even going back into pagan times, which is unusual for someone who was a devout Christian, especially for the time. I figured, hey, what the heck? Let's just do his chart and check it out. And I was not disappointed. So, with all that out of the way, let's dig in. Okay, um, normally I like to go over a person's chart ruler first. I think I'm going to do it a little bit differently today because there are two really big uh, formations that I kind of want to go over. Um, Actually, you know what? I'll just get his chart ruler out of the way and then we'll just go from there. First things first, he was a Virgo rising. Virgo rising is someone who, the way what's most apparent about them, how they deal with change, is they tend to be very analytical people. You know, they take in new information and then process it through a very highly analytical lens. They can be prone to anxiety and overthinking when negatively aspected, but what is typically true of a Virgo rising is they're almost always very intelligent people. So that being said, they also tend to be practical to a fault. Virgo is an earth-based sign. Earth is just very, very practical. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and when we look at his chart ruler, Mercury, it's right there in Capricorn, another Earth sign, but it's also retrograde. So, retrograde doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. Well, what it does mean is he probably had a highly unusual way of looking at the world. People with Mercury retrograde also tend to be highly intelligent, but it's in a way that may be misunderstood by other people, you know, because it's such a different way of approaching things. And I think throughout his life, Tolkien was frequently misunderstood, but we'll dig into that more later. Um, I can move on to his sun because his sun is at the apex of the first formation that I want to talk about is the minor grand trine. So at the apex of that is his sun, which is also in Capricorn. And it's making a sextile both to his Mars in Scorpio second house, and then also to his natal Jupiter in Pisces seventh house. So what's interesting about both his Jupiter and his Mars is both of those planets are domicile in their signs, and while the Sun doesn't necessarily like being in Capricorn, it's part of this really nice, strong minor grand trine that I think it's very powerful. The Sun gets along pretty well with Mars, so whenever they're working in harmony, that means their Sun's especially powerful. It also means that it was a very serious individual, very hardworking. Given that his son is in his fifth house, which is the house of creativity, that means one, he was probably slow moving when it came to creativity, which yeah, that actually can be confirmed as he was a very slow writer because he liked to flesh everything out to the umpteenth degree. He's well known for creating his own languages, after all. Uh, uh, yeah, which in some ways it kind of makes him a nerd, doesn't it? Because he finds certain things that almost no one would find entertaining, but he finds it fun. Like for reals though, who makes up a language of their own on their own free time? Like, what a dork. No, but seriously though, that just goes to show just how intelligent he was because it truly is its own language that you can learn and speak. It has its own written form. It's something that he fully fleshed out. And yeah, actually, if you really feel like it, you can learn Elvish on your own time. So, um, but it just goes to show that he had this tireless work ethic with his Mars in Scorpio that, he didn't have quit in him. Like, sure, he was probably slower when it came to actually putting work out there, but it was something that he just worked on tirelessly. And then with that Jupiter and Pisces, that's that very artistic energy that just that has that spiritual element that when you read his works, it's just full of all this spiritual artistic flair. His work is so interesting in that while a lot of it absolutely does have his Catholic influences, it also has very strong pagan influences as well because he had this deep, deep understanding of his own cultural and ethnic roots. Um, that he didn't shy away from at all, which is what makes his work so special, I think. So that's what's displayed right here, and I think that this is what made him the tremendous author uh, that he is. That where his work is loved so long after he died, and I mean his contributions to the fantasy genre. I mean, it's quite possible it wouldn't even exist without him. It certainly wouldn't be the same, I can tell you that. People have always told stories, but I mean, that's just how big of a deal he still is in the fantasy scene. So yeah, that's I think that'll about do it for that minor grand trine. If I keep talking about it, I'll probably beat that horse to death. So the next one I want to talk about is the Grand Air Trine in his chart. So, which again, this leads to him being a highly intelligent. Go figure. I mean, he was a professor of language after all, created his own languages, etc. We don't have to keep talking about that one. So, this or excuse me, air grand trine includes his Saturn in Libra, first house, trine Venus in Aquarius, sixth house, trine Pluto, Neptune conjunct, and Gemini, ninth house. So, what does this mean? So, Saturn in Libra is exalted. And what this means is he was the kind of person who presented himself very well, always looked very dapper, and like if you look at pictures of him, he's always very well dressed, very well presented. He kind of had an air about himself. If you ever watch interviews of him, the way he speaks, the way he talks, very dignified, very dignified. Um, he was also the kind of person who had, even if he ever lost his temper, he was like that kind of person who just, fly off the handle, still very controlled. Who's making that kind of a person angry is almost more scary, because they're just that in control of themselves. Yeah, so then that makes a nice trine to his Venus, which um, Saturn does rule Aquarius there, so his Venus is in reception. Actually, that's mutual reception, excuse me, because Libra is ruled by Venus. So this just kind of shows that since his sixth house is, he took a great pleasure in like highly unusual things. It kind of like what I was saying earlier, how like he's a nerd. This is what this is. Like I said, he's created his own language that actually started up when he was a kid. apparently a couple of his cousins started that, and he worked with his cousins to make up their own language, and then he did it all over again when he was creating Middle Earth. Um, and so that's really what that is. Is he was the kind of guy who was probably a bit of a workaholic, uh, and just loved what he did. And then it makes this trying to Pluto Neptune. At first, I kind of had a difficulty with this one because they tend to be very negative planets. But since this is in the ninth house, does include the higher learning, and since I mean that's where he worked, right? Like he was a professor. Almost all of his life was spent in an academic setting, at least his adult life, excluding his time fighting in World War One. He was in academia. And what this conjunction is saying is he had the ability to dissolve boundaries and see the hidden worlds, the hidden things, especially within language. Because Gemini has a lot to do with communication and the intellect. It's also ruled by Mercury. And what's so interesting is the ruler of this conjunction is again Mercury. It's right there in the fourth house. So this he was able to dissolve the boundaries and see the hidden things, especially within language of an inheritance of his own people. And when you look at his work, he was even outside of Lord of the Rings. This is what he's less known for by the general public. Is he was very well respected in his field of philology. And actually, when you look at the saga of Beowulf, before Tolkien, that was largely used solely for history. Like they would read the poem and try to figure out historical things about the Anglo-Saxons. But Tolkien like spearheaded the movement to get the saga of Beowulf seen in a different light as a literary work and respected as a literary work. Um, so if that's something you're interested in looking into, you can go ahead and do it. But yeah, I think that's what made The Lord of the Rings so well respected is because even though he'll to say it all the time that he despised allegory, um, that doesn't mean that his works weren't inspired by real things. And that's why a lot of his work feels so real because that's just how much he understood language, myth, and how it works. And that's why The Lord of the Rings, The Silmarillion, all these stuff, like it transcends pure fiction and in my opinion, become myth in its own right. So that's kind of what this minor grand trine is kind of talking about. So I'll go over some of the more difficult aspects because everybody's got them. That being said, in Tolkien's case, I don't really think they're bad. So what I have not talked about is his moon. He was a Pisces moon. So Pisces moon people they tend to have uh, uh, be highly spiritual people and they get a lot of emotional fulfillment through their spirituality. Which, as we know, he was a devout Catholic, um, and he took his faith very seriously. Um, Funnily enough, he actually wasn't born Catholic. He converted to Catholicism, and that actually um, there was actually a serious problem with his family who were Baptist. So that actually caused strife in his family, but it didn't matter to him. We'll say this does square that Pluto-Neptune conjunction. And really what this means is academia, especially within the realm of like a philology and language, even with myth, is like oftentimes you'll see its approach is stripped of any metaphysical or spiritual context. It happens a lot. And that's where this clash is. It's not so much that it's a problem for him because I think on a spiritual level he fully understood this stuff. I would say it's probably a score within his peers. That would be the problem, especially within his work. Probably wasn't taking it seriously, and that was probably a big clash. And that could probably be hard on him on an emotional level, just trying to navigate that. This Pluto Neptune conjunction also squares his Jupiter, and a lot of it's for the same reasons, honestly. It squares his one-on-one relationships. Um, Actually, it reminds me of a funny anecdote. So someone who has Jupiter in Pisces, more often than not, they tend to be pretty forgiving people. They're not very harsh. Um, but since he was the kind of person who understood fully myth and language and stories. Um, he got pretty persnickety if he felt someone wasn't treating it seriously. And actually, there's letters of him and his friend C.S. Lewis going back and forth, absolutely trashing Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's pretty hilarious. If you're interested in checking that out, you can go ahead and check it out. But yeah, he hated the Disneyfication of myth. And frankly, he's right. He's right, but it's also pretty hilarious. The how they go back and forth. He and C.S. Lewis went back and forth on that. So I think that's largely what that is. Again, squares with Jupiter really typically aren't that big of a deal, but yeah, I think he could be a pretty grouchy person if someone wasn't taking something that he believed in fully seriously. So just a funny little tidbit about him. That also kind of leads into the next square that I wanted to talk about. So his chart ruler Mercury is making an exact square to Saturn in Libra. Interesting about this square is his Saturn is exalted and it also rules his Mercury. So what does this mean? Well, we got to remember that his Mercury is retrograde. Um, and that means even though he's a highly intelligent person and he was highly articulate, he's a very, very smart man. I think at times he was probably almost too articulate for his own good and would frequently be misunderstood. And I think that could probably lead to him being argumentative. And people with Mercury and Capricorn tend to be very blunt, very all business, very serious. And it kind of clashes with the Saturn and Libra in that Saturn and Libra is like the diplomat, is they fully understand niceties and they just know how to work the system. And they tend to understand that bluntness and directness can be jarring for people. But he was also the kind of person who he was a bit of a cranky old man at times, and he'd give you a piece of his mind if he felt you were misinterpreting his work or misinterpreting or treating something that he felt very strongly about wrongly. So. Yeah. And actually, that makes a lot of sense because when you look at his Mercury, it's also making an exact sextile to his moon in Pisces. So that even goes beyond his work. That also goes with his spirituality too, which when you look at his letters, like they're full of him, like fully fleshing out like spiritual disagreements he had with people, you know. And what's funny is the bluntness of his disagreement kind of clashes with that Saturn and Libra energy. So that was just something that was pretty interesting that I wanted to point out. And it's kind of a joke of when you really look into Tolkien's life, you can find all these things that he just disliked, and it kind of comes off as a grumpy old man. But I think that's just because he took both his work and things that brought him spiritual fulfillment very seriously and didn't like them being treated wrongly. And then when you look at the time that he was born, when there was a great change, he lived through World War One, fought in World War One, and then lived through World War Two and saw the post World War Two era. And as he was very traditionalist, I think he just had a big problem with where the world was headed. So that's why more of the grumpy old man side of him came out, especially as he grew older. But I don't know. Personally, I find it endearing. So, anyways, yeah. So I think that'll about do it. This one's been very fun. Like I've said, Tolkien's work is my absolute favorite. I absolutely love his stuff. Fell in love with it when I was a kid. Read The Lord of the Rings when I was a teenager. Yeah. I'm not sure there is a man who has done more for Anglo-Saxon mythology, literature, and history than him, to be honest. So. Anyways, that'll about do it for Tolkien. That'll about do it for today. If there's anybody else you want me to do, go ahead and leave a name in the comments. Also, I do this professionally, so if you'd like to book my services, I'll go ahead and link my website and my email in the description below. Uh, yeah, that'll about do it for today, and we'll see you next time.